Many people see China's newest military pride, the Fujian aircraft carrier, as a threat to the USS Gerald R. Ford and a sign of China's growing naval power. The Fujian, on the other hand, is just a show. It has major flaws that make it useless. When put up against the US Navy's fleet, especially the Gerald R. Ford class carriers it's supposed to compete with, the Fujian is a terrible ship. The only way to figure out how this could happen is to go back in time. In terms of the US, this would take us back to 1922, when the USS Langley was commissioned as the country's first aircraft carrier. This was the start of a practice that would grow into a fleet of cutting-edge carriers that define naval supremacy. For China, we only need to look back to 2012, when the Liaoning was first launched. To learn about the first aircraft carrier that China made from scratch, we would have to go ahead in time a few years to December 17, 2019, when the Shandong aircraft carrier was put into service. That was only 5 years ago. You should now get what we're saying. Even though China has come a long way with the Fujian, its carrier program is still very young compared to the US Navy's, which has more than 100 years of experience and technology progress. Simply put, Fujian's flaws are the result of a country that is still getting used to naval flight. That's why things are the way they are. People have called this plane a naval powerhouse, a major threat to US naval supremacy, and the technology that will catapult China's naval power. But China has put a lot of money into the People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, and other parts of the military, so it's almost amazing that it hasn't been able to reach its lofty goals. There was a 7.5% compound annual growth rate, CAGR, in Beijing's defense spending from 2019 to 2023. The rate of growth reached $230.3 billion in 2023. With a CAGR of 6.6%, this impressive rate is expected to keep going and hit an estimated $323.7 billion by 2028. The Fujian-class aircraft carrier, also called Type 003, will soon be China's biggest warship. This shows how much money has been spent to bring the plan up to date. The Jiangnan shipyard started building it in the middle of the 2010s, with the first pieces being put together in March 2015. The building of the carrier moved along slowly, but by September 2020, the bottom and base hull blocks were mostly in place. The top part of the ship was finished in July 2021, and the Fujian was launched on June 17, 2022. Its first trip ended on May 1, 2024. From May 9 to May 9, 2024, sea trials were held to test its power and motor systems. These trials were said to be about 60 miles east of Shanghai. The fourth of these sea trials took place in September 2024. This shows that the Fujian is almost ready to join China's active line of aircraft carriers. Beijing is very protective of its powers, so the exact details of China's Fujian-class aircraft carrier, which is also known as Type 003, are not widely known. While the U.S. Office for Naval Intelligence has given us some useful information about its features, we can now see what the Fujian can do and, let's be honest, what it shouldn't do. If you aren't paying attention, the Fujian and the Ford might look almost the same, since China's style is very similar to the American one. However, this superficial similarity hides the big differences in what they can do and how well they do it. First, let's talk about size. Since the Fujian and the Ford look almost the same, it shouldn't be a surprise that they aren't very different in length. The Ford is impressively long, 1,092 feet, and wide, 255 feet. It is only slightly bigger than the Fujian, which is length, 1,036 feet, and width, 249 feet. The Fujian is about the same length as China's first carriers, the Liaoning and Shandong, which are both about 1,033 feet long. The Kitty Hawk class carriers of the US Navy were like these. They were 1,047 feet long and carried about 83,000 tons. When we talk about displacement, bigger gaps become clear. Because the Ford weighs 20,000 tons more, it sits lower in the water, which means its center of gravity is lower. While ships with a lower center of gravity are more stable, they can also handle more bold maneuvers with more control. Because it is more stable, it rolls and pitches less, which makes it a better platform for flight operations and better at handling rough seas. Basically, Ford's bigger displacement not only makes it easier to maneuver and more stable, but it also lets it carry a bigger air wing and have more facilities on board. The USS Gerald R. Ford is the leader of the US Navy. It has a wide range of powerful self-defense systems that can protect it from different types of threats. 2 raised Sea Sparrow launchers and 2 rolling airframe missile (RAN) launchers are among these. They provide strong defense against incoming missiles. The Ford has 4 25mm Bushmaster chain guns and 4 .50 caliber machine guns that can be used against small boats and attack craft on the surface. The Slick 32 Victor 6 system uses advanced radar and electromagnetic methods to find, track, and destroy threats. It does this by combining active and passive measures. The best way to describe the Fujian's weapons is with one phrase: close but not quite. Even though the Fujian is current, its self-defense features aren't as good as the Ford's in a number of ways, making them disappointing. The Fujian is said to have 3 18-cell guided missile systems that could be armed with HHQ-10 surface-to-air missiles to fight these. These rockets, on the other hand, haven't been used in battle as much and can only hit targets moving at 5.6 miles per second or 3.7 miles per second. It looks like the Fujian might also have directed energy systems and maybe even acoustic weapons, but there isn't as much information about these as there is about the modern defenses on the Ford. In general, the Ford class is ready to firmly defend itself against any possible threats. The Fujian might need more than just a few tweaks to catch up. The USS Gerald R. Ford is the pride of the US military power. Its carrier air wing is like a small air force, and every part of it was carefully planned to handle a wide range of combat situations. Up to 40 FA-18E/F Super Hornets, 7 EA-18G Growlers, 12 MH-60R Romeo helicopters, and 8 MH-60S Seahawk helicopters can fit on the ship. The Ford's abilities are enhanced by its 5 E-2D Hawkeye Airborne Early Warning (AEW) planes, which increase the ship's radar coverage to hundreds of miles and help find and track possible threats quickly. The Fujian's air wing is thought to have anywhere from 40 to 60 planes, but neither number is even close to the Ford's amazing complement. There are rumors that the Fujian's air wing could have both J-15 fighters and the next generation J-35 stealth planes. The KJ-600 Airborne Early Warning aircraft is also likely to be on the carrier. It is meant to have similar capabilities to the E-2 Hawkeye in the US Navy, but the systems are still in the testing process. At this point, it's clear that the Ford is the better of the 2 supercarriers, while the Fujian is a letdown. Today, if these 2 supercarriers got into a fight, the Ford would easily beat the Fujian. The USS Gerald R. Ford is a carrier with a great history of flight operations, but it has to deal with a number of problems in order to keep air control during battle. The Chinese Navy, on the other hand, has never done such intense flight operations. This means that there is a huge information gap between generations and Fujian. The Fujian doesn't have the right equipment or enough experience to keep up with the speed of operations needed to keep air superiority during a fight. The Ford has 3 lifts for planes, while the Fujian only has 2. The Ford's 3rd lift changes everything. It lets the Ford switch between planes faster, keep up a higher sortie rate and quickly refuel jets. It does not have quick weapons lifts, though, which are the world's fastest and most reliable. Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, EMALS, is on both the Ford and the Fujian. The main difference is that the Ford has built the technology into a fully functional, battle-tested aircraft. This ship has 4 catapults, which is 1 more than the Chinese one. Lastly, the Fujian doesn't have any high-tech stopping gear, which is important for safe landings and keeping planes from crashing. The Ford has innovative water-arresting gear that makes the planes less stressed, lowers repair costs, and speeds up the rate at which sorties are made. Fujian, on the other hand, still uses old-fashioned hydraulic arresting devices that break down and leak a lot. In conclusion, the Chinese Navy and the USS Gerald R. Ford are much better at flight operations, elevators, catapult systems, and modern arresting gear. The Ford has a big advantage in high-speed wars because it can recover planes with little downtime. The Chinese Navy, on the other hand, is less competitive because it lacks experience and equipment. As China's biggest aircraft carrier, the Fujian has had to deal with a number of problems during its construction and operation. One big weakness is that the carrier doesn't have dual-band radar, which would let it track and attack multiple targets at different frequency bands. This technology makes changes easier and speeds up the time it takes to deal with new threats. But the Fujian doesn't have this technology, which makes it less able to handle and respond to threats right away. Second, the Fujian doesn't have a good way to move. The Ford is powered by nuclear power, but the Fujian is driven by steam turbines and diesel generators. This means that it can't go as fast or as far, and it needs to be refueled often. On the other hand, the Ford has two A1B nuclear reactors that give it almost unlimited endurance. It can move at speeds of over 30 knots for decades without having to refuel. In long-term wars, where staying at sea and projecting power is key, this makes the Fujian an easy target. Finally, one of the biggest problems is that there isn't a network for ongoing restocking. The Ford can keep going as long as it has fuel, food, and weapons. If it runs out of any of these, it can restock at sea thanks to the US Navy's large network of ships that can do this. On the other hand, the plan doesn't have a system like this, so the Fujian would have to make regular trips to ports to refuel and restock. This dependence is a major weakness, especially when there is a long-lasting dispute. China is geographically isolated, so the Fujian is only able to do business in the area, mostly along China's coastlines or on man-made island chains. In a long-range battle or global war, this would make it much less useful. The Ford, on the other hand, could work almost anywhere in the world thanks to the US Navy's excellent logistics support. Finally, the Fujian's inability to show strength in the Indo-Pacific could be a big problem for China's future military defense. It is very important to think about whether the Fujian's abilities are sufficient to support the cost of building a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier.